Veteran Voice. I'm Larry McCullough. I'm glad you've joined us for today's program. We have a very special guest with us today who we've made efforts to get, and we finally got our schedules together. It's our congressional representative in Washington, D.C. for the House of Representatives, Congressman Ed Whitfield. Congressman, welcome to the program.
Well, Larry, thanks so much. I really appreciate it, and I know you and I have talked about this a number of times, and it's finally worked out, so I'm quite excited about being here.
Well, we always appreciate the things that you've done for the 1st Congressional District and the things you've done for veterans. And we've got some questions, obviously, that we want to talk to. Now, normally when I have a guest who's a veteran, I tell them to tell me what branch they were in and when they got started. So to start with you, why don't you tell us when you entered the Congress, how long you've been in there, and if you'd like to, go ahead and point out some of the things that you have done for veterans that you're most proud of.
Well, thanks, Larry, for giving me that opportunity. First of all, I want to thank all of the veterans for the tremendous sacrifices they've made for our country, not only them, but also their family members, all of whom were impacted by their service. And we've had, today, there are about 366,000 veterans, men and women, in the state of Kentucky. And I had the opportunity of serving in the military myself, and I think anyone who has served in the military would agree that it's a tremendous experience working with other men and women, esprit de corps, trying to accomplish a goal. And I think that the young people who do enter the military really benefit in so many ways. I remember I did my AIT, Advanced Individual Training, in armor, driving tanks, and I was in the reserves for a period of 6 years. And looking back, I'll tell you, Larry, I wish I had stayed longer, because I think the military, as I said, is a tremendous experience. It provides it's a real service to our country. And I was elected to Congress in 1994. I'm now in my 6th term. This is actually my 12th year in the U.S. Congress. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of, and particularly as it relates to veterans issues, has to do with accessibility of health care for veterans. Now, I would be the first to say that the veterans' health care system is not a perfect system, and we know that there are still a lot of problems with it. But since I've been in Congress, just to give you an example, we've opened up 3 outlet health care centers for veterans. One in Hanson, Kentucky, one in Paducah, and one up in the Hopkinsville, now at Fort Campbell area. And they're looking at opening one up in Mayfield. And of course, I was down here last year when they opened up the new facility here in Paducah. Also, the veterans nursing home that was built over in Hanson, Kentucky. There was a lot of federal funds involved in that, as well as some state funds. But the fact that we were able to build that center was the result of the state and federal delegations coming together and making that work. And I think all the veterans that had any experience with that facility agrees that it's been a tremendous asset for them. So I think those are some particular things that I'm most proud of. In addition, my involvement with others of opening up the new cemetery, the Veterans Cemetery in Hopkinsville. I'm sure you've been over there,
yes,
and you probably were there the day we officially opened it. But it's a beautiful cemetery, and it's certainly fitting for a final resting place for our veterans.
As a matter of fact, I know of a lot of fellows who've already got their reservations in, if you will,
Right.
And it is a beautiful facility, and it was needed in Western Kentucky. So we certainly appreciate the things that you have done. Most of the questions that I'm going to be talking to you about today come from the Veterans Coalition. As you know, we've got a Veterans Coalition here in Western Kentucky, which consists of the presidents or commanders of the major veterans organizations, the VFW and the DAV, the American Legion, Vietnam veterans, ex-POWs, etc. And we meet once a month and compare notes, and we look at our magazines that all the organizations put out. And they have a lot of different legislative things, and they usually give us a pretty good idea. So I asked the other commanders to get questions from their members, and boy, did I get a response. So
Yeah.
I've got some. These come from these fellas, and we can hit on them. I know that it would be impossible for you to remember every vote and every issue.
Right.
So I've got some notes here, but these came from the people who asked the questions. So
Okay.
if I misquote something, I hope that you'll correct me on that. The first one came from the I can tell you about this. The past VFW State Commander Mike Penny.
Right.
I believe that you know Mike, and he had written a letter to the editor where the Fairness in Asbestos Injury Resolution, what they call the FAIR Act, is being addressed, and I think that's something to do with veterans and an asbestos exposure. He was very disappointed that Senator Bunning had voted against this sometime just recently, and I was wanting to know what your feelings are on that particular act, and if you know that much about it. I personally did not know about it until I talked to Mike about it.
Well, the Fairness in Asbestos Act was an act that was introduced in the U.S. Congress. The House has not considered it yet, but the Senate actually had a vote on it. My recollection, they had a vote on it. And the purpose of that legislation was that the plaintiff's trial lawyer bar has been so successful in class action lawsuits that they've put a number of major companies into bankruptcy defending these asbestos lawsuits. And we're now finding out, by the way, that in a silicosis-related situation where a lot of the lawyers that pursued the asbestos cases and a lot of the doctors that were given the testimony, we're now finding out in the silicosis cases that there has been some fraud involved in these class action lawsuits. In fact, a federal judge in Texas dismissed and remanded back to the state courts the claims of about 10,000 people because she said that the doctors, it was proven, who made the diagnosis that they had a particular disease had never examined the patients. And that's a fundamental flaw in our legal system. But the purpose of the FAIR Act was to put a lid on the amount of damages, the theory being that if you continue to bankrupt these companies, there are lots of people losing jobs, but the FAIR Act was going to provide money, a pool of money, so that people who legitimately had been exposed to asbestos and had the disease would have a fundamental right to be compensated for that disease without having to go through a complicated legal system. And that bill failed the Senate, I believe, by 1 or 2 votes. And it's my understanding that Senator Frist may be bringing that bill back for consideration. And I do know that many veterans are interested in it because in some of their assignments they have been exposed to asbestos exposure.
So even though it didn't go through the first time, it may reemerge as,
Yes. Yeah.
with some alterations then.
Absolutely. I will say this to you, that anything that's passed in the U.S. Congress today is a major effort because you've got people from 50 different states, 435 different congressional districts. You've got a division among the parties more pronounced now by the leaders, more so than the rank and file, than I've seen in a long time. Strong philosophical differences on the approaches to be taken, and it's very difficult to pass any legislation, and particularly on the Senate side when one senator can invoke a filibuster, and in order to cut that off you have to have cloture, and in order to get cloture you've got to get 60 senators to invoke it to stop it. And since there are 55 Republicans, you have to have 5 Democrats to go along with you. So it's very difficult to pass anything in Congress today.
That would explain why people are sometimes frustrated that things don't seem to happen, is because of the gridlock that seems to be there. Another question that came to me was on House Resolution H.R. 1815. This was in May of last year, and it was a motion to expand access to military personnel, to military TRICARE health insurance programs for reservists and National Guard members. And it was pointed out that there were, I believe, 433,000 National Guard and reservists who have been called to active duty, not necessarily in Iraq, but on active duty, and that you did not support that. And I was wondering if there was a reason, or if there was another bill coming along, or if there was something else in this bill that you were not aware of or did not like.
Well, I have supported legislation, and we did expand TRICARE availability for guardsmen and reservists who have called to active duty and serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, I did not support giving National Guardsmen and reservists who are not on active duty all of the same benefits of the active duty military personnel, because it was my feeling that they have different duties and responsibilities. Reservists and National Guardsmen have other occupations, and they meet once a month, and they go on active duty a couple of weeks a year. So that's a little bit different than being on active duty. But once the war on terrorism started, and we started activating all of these reserve units and guard units, they have almost become like active duty men and women in the military. And when they're serving in Iraq and they're serving in Afghanistan, I fully support their being eligible for every benefit that an active duty member of the service receives. And I have voted to expand the TRICARE coverage for them and their families. There have been some votes where I did not support it, but if they're on active duty and they're serving like active duty men and women, and all of our reserve units and guard units in Afghanistan and Iraq are doing that, then it's only right that they get these same benefits.
Okay. Well, that certainly makes sense, that those who are deserving and being on active duty would deserve to be treated the same way as those on, well, they are active duty personnel.
Well,
at that point in
absolutely. I
time.
mean, we've lost a lot of men and women in the Guard and Reserves in serving in Iraq who've been killed and who have been permanently injured and have disabilities, and it would be irresponsible for us not to provide them with the same care, it seems to me.
Well, that clarifies that then. HRC 95, which was in April of last year, was passage of $2.6 trillion budget, conference report for 2006, and among other things, and that may have been the reason that you voted for this, that it would cut funding for VA healthcare by $13.5 billion over 5 years. Were there other things in that bill that?
Well, now last year we had a supplemental that provided an additional $2 billion because of a shortfall in healthcare funding, and I supported that legislation because without that legislation there would not have been sufficient funds to provide the healthcare needs. So I voted for that $2 billion additional dollars, and my recollection, I don't know that there was any negative as far as the veterans were concerned from that supplemental. This was $2 billion going into the healthcare system that was not there before. And I might add, Larry, in the last 5 years, 5 years ago in 2001, we appropriate $48 billion for the Veterans Administration. 2006, the Veterans Administration is receiving right at $71 billion. That's a 48% increase in 5 years. Now, when you consider everything that's going on the war against terrorism, the increased expenditure of funds for Homeland Security, the new prescription drug benefit for our senior citizens on Medicare, the deficit that we have, I mean, I think we've tried to step up to the plate and help the veterans. In addition to that, just for the health care needs of veterans, we've gone from about $21 billion 5 years ago to up to over $31 billion now, for a 35% increase on just health care funding. And I'll tell you something else that we've done in the last 5 years that the veterans had asked us to do. When I say us, I was not in Congress all that time, but for the last 25, 30 years, this concurrent receipt issue. We passed that legislation we did not give them 100% that they wanted, but we're phasing it in over time so that there is not a deduction, an offset on the disability and the retirement pay. I mean, if you're retired and you happen to be disabled, it's not right that you get an offset. So we've tried to address that through the current concurrent receipt. We passed it, and I think that we have shown our commitment to our veterans.
I know that was an issue for a long time, and talked to several people about it, and it was a long time that it took to get done, but that's, like you say, a lot of times that you have to be able to get everybody on the same page. But that is something I remember that you did get accomplished, that the Congress did take care of, that was kind of a thorn for a long time.
And I tell you what, over 10 years, that concurrent receipt is going to put an additional $22 billion basically into the pockets of veterans, and over 250,000 veterans nationwide are going to benefit from it. And you know, we have 27 million veterans nationwide in our country today. So that concurrent receipt issue was a big issue for the pocketbook of veterans.
Oh, yes. Well, appreciate you clearing that up. Let me see. Somebody was asking about House H.R. 1268, and this was to increase funding for military health care by $100 million. That seems like a unusually high amount. And transitional job training for military personnel by $50 million.
Well, I'm
Do you
not
recall
familiar
that?
with H.R. 1268, but as
Okay.
I said, I mean, we've increased the overall budget for the VA in the last 5 years by 48%, 47%. And as far as providing educational benefits for veterans, I will tell you that in 2001, because of legislation we approved then, we boosted the GI Bill by 46%, and the lifetime benefit for qualified veterans has gone from $23,400 to $35,460. So as far as educational benefits, we're also trying to up that figure so veterans do have that educational option available to them.
Okay, so they can further their education
Right.
to advance and get other jobs. I've noticed in one of the veterans magazines that the annual health care for has doubled from almost doubled from $38 billion in the last 5 years to be projected to about $64 billion by 2015. And to help contain the cost, President Bush has proposed a higher copay for the Category 7 and 8 beneficiaries of military health care, and to increase the enrollment fees for military retirees who are not yet 65 from between $230 and $460 a month to go up to $650 to $1,400 by 2008. I presume that these are people with unrelated military health problems, and that it's an effort by the president to try to curb the spending on the VA budget.
Well, I think that's right. There are different categories of veterans, and they are talking about deductibles and increased premiums and so forth for some of them. But it's also important to remember that whenever the president submits his budget, that budget is prepared by the OMB, Office of Management and Budget. And frequently, they make all sorts of recommendations in that budget that Congress never adopts or does not agree with. And I can tell you, Congress has not approved any further additional burdens financially on the veterans from the perspective of copays or anything like that. And we would have to look at that for a very hard look and be convinced that that's the right thing to do. The problem with putting additional responsibilities on veterans as far as making them pay more for their health care is that most of them have limited incomes, and their incomes are not increasing that much. If they're on Social Security, they get a small COLA. If they have a military pension, they may get some small increases. But health care is going at such a dramatic increase that I don't think that I would be supporting an additional copays for them at this time.
So there is talk of the copays going up, but you would more than likely not support anything that would put a further burden on those veterans. Or
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, there is talk about it, and you know, it's not only the health care of the veterans that's in dire straits today. I mean, the health care, the Medicare system, the Medicaid system, all of those systems, the costs are out of control. And I think instead of doing Band-Aid approaches just to save a few $1 million a year, and I know that's important, we have to have a fundamental approach to addressing the overall health care problem in America to try to constrain the runaway inflation of health care and protect the quality of health care and the delivery system. And right now, we're not in a position to agree on what should be done. So I do not support these Band-Aid approaches of just doing little increases on veterans or senior citizens to find a few $1 million a year, which I don't think helps solve the problem at all.
in other words, they need to be. You would be in favor of looking at long-term changes that would actually repair the problem instead of just, as you say, slap a Band-Aid on it to.
Yeah, we need
get
a
to the next
comprehensive
fiscal year.
approach to it, a comprehensive approach, not only veterans health care, but also Medicare, Medicaid.
Okay. The VA Secretary, Jim Nicholson, is. Okay, he appears to have kind of a deaf ear to veterans, it seems to many of us. And I remember I sat down last night trying to brush up on some of the articles that I'd seen in the DAV magazines, and the thing that I seem to notice about Secretary Nicholson, one of the barbs that he seems to have thrown at him is that it may not be qualified, that he was the chairman of the Democrat or the Republican National Committee and the ambassador to the Vatican. And there are fellows that think that maybe he was not qualified. And I noticed in the magazine article he's saying what we want to hear as far as what he's going to do, but his actions do not appear to coincide with that. And what I mean by that is I think you probably were aware of the study that he had ordered on the 72,000 cases of post-traumatic stress disorder by veterans who were 100% disabled with PTSD, and that, because of pressure from congressmen and veterans, was canceled. And then 6 days later, he started another inquiry that will be done by the Institute of Medicine, and it appears that what they're wanting to do is, from our angle, it looks like he's wanting to reevaluate or rewrite the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. That's very concerning to veterans, not only who are receiving benefits for that, but we know that there are going to be a certain number of people coming out of the Iraqi war and Afghanistan problems with psychological problems. We're seeing some of those already in the early stages. I was wondering what kind of a relationship you have with, if any, with Secretary Nicholson, and if you think that he's doing a good job, and is he really sincere in helping veterans?
Well, I do know him, by the way, and I do think he is sincere, and I don't know if all of your listeners to this program are aware of it, but he's a West Point graduate. He has a military background. He was the ambassador to the Vatican. He also was chairman of the Republican Party. He also built, after his military service, a quite successful construction company. So he is an extraordinary person with a lot of talents and abilities, but anytime you put anybody as the head of a government agency, there's going to be a lot of problems. And I know, because I've heard him speak privately as well as publicly, that he is totally dedicated to providing good health care and benefits for our veterans. Now, I'm not intimately familiar with this post-traumatic syndrome situation that you're talking about, but I know from his military career, from his military background, that he is committed. And as I said, there are lots of shortcomings, and we are going to be called upon, and we have to be responsible for these young men and women coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan with a lot of very serious injuries, loss of limbs, not to mention the mental state and the psychological problems that we know they're going to have. And when a country puts our young men and women into that situation, we do have to be responsible to provide care for them. And as I said earlier, I want to stress this again, we've got a lot of shortcomings in our VA system. There's no question about that. But when you're increasing funding at a time of the deficits that we have by 48% over 5 years, and for the entire department, and 35% for just the medical part, I think that shows the commitment of the Congress and of the administration to help veterans. But we can't back down now, because if there's ever a time our young men and women in the military need us, it's now.
Well, I'm glad that you realize that. I'm glad that you do have a good relationship with Secretary Nicholson. So I know that you are contacted from time to time with problems that veterans seem to be having, and overall, the things that I hear in return are good as far as you're representing the veterans. I know that any time I've contacted your office, it's always come back. I've gotten a response and an explanation, and sometimes it takes a while, but I know that that's because of the backlog of the VA. I know that that's sometimes how it works. And that's something, that question, that little brain thing that hit me just now. I know that, like I said, I've contacted your office many times and been very happy with the response time. What is the best way for veterans or anyone to contact you and let you know their feelings on a particular issue or anything? Is it best to give you a phone call, email you, send you a letter, a petition? What carries the most weight?
Well, I really think that letters are always good, but the problem with letters today, because of the security in D.C., anytime a constituent mails a letter to me at the Capitol, it has to go through all sorts of security, and it has to be screened, and sometimes we don't receive letters for about a month or so after they were sent, and sometimes more than that. So I really think the most effective way is to talk to me in the district, or David Mast is my field rep in the Paducah area. Michael Pape of Hopkinsville is the overall district director, and then I have 3 other congressional offices in the district. It's always good to be able to give them a letter or talk to them personally when you see them. You also can go on mail.house.gov on the internet under the U.S. House of Representatives website, and they have the individual members of Congress listed, and you can go to my name and just send us an email, and we receive all those emails instantaneously. Now, we get so many of them that I'm not saying that we're getting to a point where you get an automatic response immediately, but you don't get the substantive answer for a little bit later. But obviously, we're interested in hearing from the veterans. I'm interested in hearing from them, the problems that they're having, and we want to be accessible. And so emails, phone calls, catching one of the field reps personally in the district I think it's probably the best way to go.
So snail mail's kind of at the bottom of the list then.
I would say yes, it is.
Pretty far down.
Yeah.
Well, Congressman, we've gotten to the end of the first half hour.
Yeah.
If you have the time, if you could, please, I would appreciate it if you could stick around a little bit longer.
Sure.
We'll let the viewers at home go warm up a piece of pizza and grab a soft drink, and we'll get a drink of water. And if you come back and spend another half hour with us, we've got a few more issues that I'd like to touch on, and if you could spare the time, we'd certainly love that.
Well, I'd be glad to do that, Larry. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Good deal. Well, we'll check out for just a second here. Y'all take care of what you got to do, but come right back. We've got Congressman Whitfield for another half hour. Welcome back. We're glad that you stayed with us with our special guest today, Congressman Ed Whitfield. Congressman, I appreciate you taking the time to stay with us for another segment here. There's a lot of debate among veterans of discretionary spending, the VA budget being under discretionary spending versus mandatory spending. And there are two different sides to that argument about why it should be mandatory and why it's okay to leave it as discretionary, because the Congress has always stepped up, just like this past year when there was a shortfall. The Congress immediately got involved and put enough money into the VA system to get it through its fiscal year. How do you feel on on whether the VA budget should be discretionary or mandatory, and what pros and cons are there to that?
Well, I mean, I think health care coverage, the Medicare is a mandatory program, Medicaid's a mandatory program, and VA health care should be a mandatory program. You're right. Anytime there's been a shortfall, we've stepped forward. So in a way, I think it is a mandatory program. But and I'm quite convinced that Congress will always appropriate money if there's a shortfall. But I think that there wouldn't be anything wrong with us going on and making it mandatory, because why should you discriminate against a veteran when you're making it eligible for Medicare? It's mandatory for Medicare, it's mandatory for Medicaid. We may as well make it mandatory for veterans.
So if that issue did come up, you would support making the VA budget mandatory then?
Absolutely.
Oh, outstanding.
The health care part.
The health care, well, yes, the health care. That's mainly what people are concerned about, or at least the veterans, as far as their own benefits that they may be receiving, or their friends, relatives' benefits. And of course, those who are coming back now, that's one thing that a lot of veterans are concerned about, is that we take care of the young men and women who are doing an outstanding job right now under some very tough circumstances.
Absolutely. And you know, I talked to you earlier, Larry, about how we had increased the money for the GI Bill for the lifetime benefit. We've also increased since 2001 by a relatively large percentage the amount of money for the GI loan for a home purchase, VA loans, and that figure now is up to like $335,000 is the maximum. And as real estate prices continue to increase, I think it's wise that we did that to give veterans an opportunity to purchase homes through the VA program.
You did mention that there was a substantial increase in, that you were kind of shocked to see what the death benefit had been in the area of around $12,000?
Yeah, just recently we did increase the death gratuity for, this was from wounds and injuries and illnesses related to combat. It's hard to believe that the death benefit up until just a few years ago was like $12,400, and now it's $100,000. But in addition to that, we've increased the group life insurance for the serviceman or woman from $250,000 to $400,000. So those are some steps that we've taken to recognize what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan, in addition to the expansion of the TRICARE for the guardsmen and reserves who are over there just like active duty people.
So the effort is there to make sure that the current troops are going to be well taken care of.
Absolutely.
Okay. Another thing that kind of strikes home with me is I know that those of us in the Vietnam era had to fight for a long time before, this is long before you were involved, before the government would admit that there was anything wrong with the exposure to Agent Orange, which contained dioxin. And consequently, they have come up with 10 diseases that are associated with exposure to dioxin or Agent Orange. And that we have service people or veterans who have had some strange diseases that came out of Desert Storm back in the early 90s. And they are pretty much going through the same thing that we did. And I know that a lot of it is these studies take time because they have to be compared with similar groups and groups that had the same thing in common with them. There is probably a chance that I would think the people serving today in Iraq and Afghanistan may be exposed to different diseases, different toxic problems that they're going to come back with. Is there any way that you think that the scientific community could accelerate any of these tests or do more tests to make sure that these people are taken care of and don't have to wait for long periods of time before they're granted their benefits?
Well, you know, we're doing everything that we can through the Center for Disease Control, through the Veterans Administration, through the Cancer Institute, the National Institute of Health, and other research groups, because we have to base these decisions on medical science and to determine that this is the cause of these injuries or these disabilities that people have. And I think that we're doing everything we possibly can to expedite that, because we need a conclusive answer. And if the conclusion is yes, it's a direct result of being exposed to X, Y, or Z, then those people should be covered. And we do have, as you know, we live in a nation that has the best medical technology in the world. I think we have some of the best physicians and healthcare providers in the world, and there's no reason that we cannot expedite these studies, but also recognize that anytime you get into scientific review and peer review of complicated issues like this, it does take time, and but we should place it as a priority and move forward as quickly as we can.
Okay. There has been some talk, and I don't know actually, to be honest with you, if this is at the state level or the federal level, where there's talk of combining VA and Medicare people in nursing homes and that type of thing, where the veterans who are staying in nursing home would not be considered as veterans anymore, but shifted over to the same evaluation as Medicare patients. Is that a state issue, or are you aware of anything like that at the federal level?
Well, if it's Medicare and it's veterans, VA, I don't think it'd be a state issue because that's primarily controlled by the federal government. If it's Medicaid, then that's more of a state issue, even though the federal government provides a lot of funding for Medicaid. But I tell you, the bottom line is this. I've not heard a lot about that. And that would be a significant step if you just start merging the veterans right into the Medicare system, because the TRICARE does provide some benefits that is significantly different than Medicare, and Medicare frequently can be more expensive. I mean, less expensive, yeah, more expensive than veterans care, and particularly when you have veterans that have disabilities and permanent disabilities as a result of their service in war or serving in the military. I think we'd have to move very carefully about merging Medicare with the Veterans Administration.
Okay. That's, like I say, that's something that I'd heard at a couple of meetings, and I wasn't sure if that was at the federal or state level.
I'm not aware, I mean, there may very well be studies going on, but I'm not aware of any specific legislation that's been introduced to do that. And I do serve on a health subcommittee that involves a part of Medicare, and there's been no discussion about it in our committee.
Well, speaking of studies, there's a lot of concern right now among veterans on a commission that's been formed called the Veterans Disability Benefits Commission. And I don't know if you're even aware of it. This is a commission that was appointed by President Bush to actually study all aspects of the VA medical care and compensation. And they have been conducting their meetings, and they are supposed to be giving a report to Congress in August of this year, I believe. And there's a lot of concerns from veterans that it's possible that these people may be looking more of cutting the budget and saving money than they are being concerned about actually taking care of veterans and their benefits and their health care, simply because there are fewer people on this commission that have, there are some who are veterans, retired veterans, but there are others who are in positions that are more from an economical standpoint, would be more concerned with cutting the budget and cutting costs than taking care of the veterans. The veterans that I talk to are concerned that they're going to rewrite things that are already established that may either hurt their benefits or the benefits of the young men and women who will be coming back. Do you know anything of this, heard anything about this Veterans Disability Benefits Commission, or are you aware of anything that they're doing?
Well, I had heard that a commission was being formed, and I'm not sure if it's been appointed yet or not. I don't see anything particularly disturbing about that. We've had commissions on Social Security. We've had commissions on Medicare, we've had commissions on Medicaid, and a commission on veterans might be a welcome development. But I do agree with those veterans who would express a concern if the only purpose of this commission is to go through 100 witnesses and come up with a comprehensive report that does nothing really but say we don't need this money and all this money in veterans health care. I think that would be counterproductive and not something that I would condone. But if it's a commission that's genuinely looking at the healthcare delivery system and maybe ways to eliminate duplication, maybe ways to be more efficient, to provide better health care, and maybe one of the results of that is that it can be less costly, because 20, 30, 40 years down the road, with the spiraling cost of Medicare, Medicaid, private health care, and veterans health care, we're going to have a financial crisis somewhere down the road. But we cannot, as you had mentioned earlier, we can't address it by a Band-Aid approach. It's got to be a comprehensive reform of the healthcare system in a way that improves delivery, improves health care, and can save some dollars, not for the purpose of saving dollars per se, but because of savings and doing it in a more efficient way, like electronic medical records and things like that, then we need to be exploring those opportunities.
Okay, so Congressman, when we talk about the cost of health care, it's not just the VA, it's the overall spectrum. When you look at the pharmaceutical companies and the money that they have to cover their research and development, the insurance companies, the money that they have to have when they take a loss, and it does seem to be spiraling out of control. Is there anything that we can see, the government could suggest or try to put in place to maybe put some type of control over this?
Well, the government is going to have to address this problem, and we are working on that. But you're right, the total cost of the VA healthcare system is relatively small when you compare it to Medicaid and Medicare and the private healthcare system. It really is basically quite small. I think that one of the great things for veterans, though, when they go to the VA system, at least they're getting their prescription drugs at very low cost. And our seniors on Medicare now, those who are most needy, the most that they're going to have to pay, and it's in effect now, is $5 for a name brand and $2 for a generic drug. So I think drug reimportation is going to be less of an issue for those people. But I think we do have to have a reform of our healthcare system. It's going to have to be comprehensive, and it is going to have to be addressed because the tax dollars that it takes to fund these is really getting totally out of control, and 30 and 40 years down the road it's going to be so expensive that the taxpayer, the people who are paying the dollars for the veterans, for the Medicare, for the Medicaid, and many of them, if their employer does not provide health insurance for them, they can't afford to buy their own health insurance. So they're paying the benefit for other people who at one time were paying the benefit for other people. And it does have to be addressed, and it's one of the #1 priorities facing the country and facing the Congress.
So it's another case where it's going to take some compromising, and Republicans and Democrats will have to work together to get a handle on this thing.
Absolutely.
In the near future.
And we're going to have some strong leadership to get it done, because healthcare experts cannot agree on what needs to be done. And philosophically, there are strong disagreements. And so it is a priority.
Well, good. I was out at the VA clinic earlier, and by the way, all the ladies and fellows out there said to say hello to you.
Thank you.
And I told them that I would mention that we do have a beautiful clinic here in Paducah, and we thank you for that. And just like a lot of other VA facilities, they've got a good facility, but they seem to be understaffed. They're doing as good a job as they can out there. I know that the experiences I have had out there have been good, and the staff does an outstanding job for being shorthanded as they are. I think that also contributes to the VA backlog. I'm sure you get calls from veterans who have filed a claim and it's been a year or 14 or 16 months and they haven't heard anything. Is there any plans, do you know, for the VA to try to bring on more personnel to see if they can eliminate some of these backlog cases and handle things in a little bit more expedient manner?
Well, the backlog cases is a significant problem, and with the number coming back from Iraq and Iran, and by the way, at the end of December, we had like 161,000 troops in Iraq. Right now, we're down to about 130,000, and later on this summer, we're going to be bringing back another 30,000. So there is beginning to be a slow redeployment out of Iraq. But we are going to have additional personnel in the veterans' healthcare system, or we're going to have technology to deal with this. And I know that they're working on that now. As you know, in any bureaucracy, it takes time, and it's frustrating, but it remains a priority for the Veterans Administration.
So they're trying to get those backlogs cleared up. I know that. Do you get a lot of calls or letters from veterans who ask you to look into their case? And is there actually anything that you can do that
Well,
that
you know,
would be any good to them?
I have a number of caseworkers that work a lot with veterans, and we've been quite successful in some of those cases. In some of those cases, we've not been successful. But if a veteran has a problem with VA, if they want to call my office, and I think the 800 number will be on the screen later, they can call, they can sign a privacy release form, and our caseworkers will call the VA hospital, and they'll pull up those medical records, review those medical records, and try to find out precisely what the problem is, and can it be expedited? What can we do to help this veteran receive the health care that he or she needs? And we do that quite frequently. And by the way, speaking of that, my office worked very closely with John Lyon over in Marshall County. I guess you knew John.
Yes.
And we were all saddened by his death just a few days ago. But he was an example of someone who was totally dedicated to veterans in this area. And I know we helped him get some vans and buses to move veterans around to the VA system, to the outlet centers, and we're all going to miss him, because if there was ever anyone dedicated to the veteran, it was John. And I know his funeral is going to be in the next day or so, and I intend to go over to Marshall County and attend that funeral.
As you bring that up, I know that just recently there's a Vietnam veteran friend of mine who I believe you were aware of. He met you several months ago at an American Legion meeting over in Benton. His name was we called him Tommy Creason, Lloyd Creason.
Right.
And there was a very ironic situation with him in that he was receiving VA health care, and he had complained about some problems, and it was a situation where they'd put him off some, and he finally got some breathing problems, went to a local hospital and was diagnosed with an advanced case of lung cancer. Now the VA had determined that his lung cancer that was more likely than not caused by his exposure to dioxin and Agent Orange in Vietnam, but Lloyd had been very active in the Vietnam Veterans of America and the American Legion in Benton, and died just recently. So,
Yeah.
you know, we're losing a lot of veterans, some
Right.
to service-related things and some not.
Yeah.
I'm sure, like you, I'd like to, we send our condolences to the families of both of those gentlemen.
Absolutely.
And
I'm glad you mentioned Lloyd, too.
And our thoughts and prayers are certainly with them.
Absolutely.
And hopefully, as time goes by, the VA healthcare is, like you say, they're much better than they were years ago, but there's still room to make up, and I know that everyone's working to take care of that.
Yeah, and I do want to reiterate, though, if a veteran out there is having a particular problem, and we know that there are a lot of problems, please call my office. I can't guarantee you we'll solve it, but we may solve it, and we most certainly will contact them and look at your file and bring it to their attention and try to come up with some resolution.
I believe that 800 number will be put on the screen so that they can, so tell your folks to get ready.
Okay.
All the veterans will be calling, but we appreciate that you can be able to help them. A lot of veterans are concerned about the families of the fellows who have been deployed from the National Guard, and this is something that I never thought about when I was on active duty, is that I never gave a lot of thought to what was happening to the families back here. My first awareness was in Desert Storm when I helped with a support group by Jack Johnson, and I see things now about the families who have been left behind, and you've pointed out that it is tough on them too. It's better now that they can communicate by email and telephone so that they have contact with their loved ones. I don't know if that's a plus or a minus as far as now that you've talked to your family, do you feel worse after you've done that? Are there any services or benefits that are available to, say, National Guard or reservists who have been activated to where they can get any type of financial help or any type of support to help them while their loved one is off serving in active
Well, you know, I
duty?
attended a symposium recently on this, and of course, those on active duty whose families are left, for example, at Fort Campbell, they have a very strong support unit there. It's well organized, it's tied to the base, and there are some educational programs to help the wives or husbands improve their education and find better occupations and so forth. But when you have the family members behind of reservists and guardsmen, they're scattered out in a wide area without any really organized support. But what I would suggest on this is if there are some family members of guardsmen or reservists who are in Iraq or in Afghanistan or somewhere else right now, and they are having some particular problem, if they want to call with that 800 number and talk to my staff and give us the details, we'll certainly get in touch with the Pentagon or the local adjutant general in Kentucky or the reserve commander, whatever, and do everything that we can to see if we can come up with some answer for them. I know recently, we were talking about this a while ago, but one of the real joys that I had in my office was we had a reserve unit from down here that was deployed to Iraq going right after Thanksgiving, and we were able to get a private large jet to fly them all into Madisonville for Thanksgiving, and they were reunited with their families for Thanksgiving, and then they're all over in Iraq right now. But I know that Thanksgiving with their family was particularly important, so it's a real joy and a pleasure to work with these families and these men and women in the military to do everything we can do to show them that we want to support them in every way we can.
Well, I'm sure they appreciate it. That's a Thanksgiving they'll never forget.
Right.
And I understand that when the 101st was deployed, you spent a substantial amount of time talking to the families of those soldiers that were going to be going over there, that you spent time taking in information to see if there was anything that you could do to help them.
Well, yes, I went down there, and I tell you the turnout was quite large that day because we let it be known that I would be coming, and I met individually with wives, husbands, and children of individual members who were in Iraq, and they talked about a myriad of problems and concerns that they had, and that was quite satisfying for me personally, but more important than that, I do think we were able to assist some of them and get the top military brass at Fort Campbell focused on some of their issues.
Well, I'm sure that the families certainly appreciate everything that you've done for them there. A little bit off of the veterans, but something that still veterans show concern about is the Patriot Act and the fact that it has been renewed. There are some veterans who feel that there are civil liberties that are being maybe encroached upon because of the big deal that's been made of the wiretaps by the president and whether it's legal or illegal. Do you feel that the Patriot Act goes too far in cutting into civil liberties, or do you feel that these are things that need to be taken care of or need to be looked at in order to assure our national security?
Well, you know, the Patriot Act was extended and it passed overwhelmingly, and so I don't think that there was any major concern about that. But anytime you're talking about civil liberties, that's a real balancing act because you need information from your intelligence gathering agencies about possible threats against our society, and in order to obtain that, you have to infringe on some civil liberties. On the other hand, those civil liberties are protected in our Constitution, and we want to balance them out. As far as the president authorizing eavesdropping without going to the court systems, he's convinced that the Attorney General was convinced that he had the legal authority to do it, considering the terroristic threat against the U.S. Now, there may well be some lawsuits about that, and if so, then I'm sure that the Supreme Court will rule on that. And from that ruling, we'll decide if we need to take additional action or not. But civil liberties are vitally important, and every citizen has a right to their privacy. But at the same time, we need information to protect all of us from additional terrorist attacks.
Okay. To close up here briefly, support for the war has been dwindling, which I think a lot of people knew it would as time went by. The president is going to stay the course. There are some members of Congress and the Senate who are now saying, well, I shouldn't have voted for it, I made a mistake. How do you feel? Do you think we did the right thing? And I know there's no quick way out of this. Do you think staying the course and supporting the troops is the proper way to deal with the war on terrorism in Iraq right now?
Well, I think most of us who voted for it, I voted for it, regret that the weapons of mass destruction were not there. In one way, that's a good thing. In another way, it's a bad thing, because that was the premise on which we entered Iraq. But I would say this. It wasn't only the U.S. intelligence that said there were weapons of mass destruction. The British intelligence said there was. The German intelligence said there was. The Russian intelligence said there was. And even the UN said there was. It turned out that that was incorrect. We're now in Iraq. I think we have to stay until we've completed the job and we've trained the Iraqi forces so that they can take care of themselves. I believe if we withdraw prematurely, it's just going to create more chaos and make that whole area less stable. So we're there. Our young men and women are performing admirably. They've been superb, and I think we've got to stay and finish the job and then get out as soon as we can get out. And having said that, I've attended a number of funeral services, and we're all always saddened by the death of anyone serving in our military. And we've had a lot of exceptional young men and women that have lost their life, and many who have been severely injured, permanently injured, and they've sacrificed. But we realize that we live in a dangerous world, and I just want to thank those men and women who are serving and tell them how much I admire them and what they're doing, and I'll tell you, the Congress is going to continue to support them while they're there.
Good. Well, we've reached the end of our time, and I want to back up what you say by saying, regardless of what your feelings are on whether the war's right or wrong, or what we did was right or wrong, we need to make sure that we support these troops coming home. They're doing a very good job under some very, very tough circumstances. I know that they have my undying respect, and hopefully everyone out in the viewing audience will take care of them. Congressman, I want to thank you very much for coming on the program, spending an hour with us today. I would encourage people that if you have questions for your congressman, you have access to the number now, so call up. His staff will be more than happy to take care of you. Appreciate you joining us today on this program, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time on Veteran Voice.